So I am Dr. Weldy from the English department, and I am thrilled to introduce our next two speakers, Jamila Minnicks and Santiago Garcia. Jamila Minnicks' novel, Moonrise Over New Jessup, was published in 2023 from Algonquin Books, and it won the 2021 Penn Bellwether Prize for the Socially Engaged Fiction. In 2022, she was awarded a Tennessee Williams Scholarship for the Sewanee Writers Conference, and she also earned a residency at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Her short fiction and essays have been published in Craft, Catapult, Blackbird, The Right Lunch, and elsewhere. Her piece, Politics of Distraction, was nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Minnicks is a graduate of the University of Michigan, the Howard University School of Law, and the Georgetown University Law Center, and she lives in Washington, D.C. Santiago Garcia has been making comics for more than 15 years in collaboration with various artists. He has published Beowulf with David Rubin, Football, La Novela Gráfica with Pablo Rios, and Las Meninas, La Cólera, and La Guerra de los Mundos with Javier Olivares. Las Meninas, which is right here, won the award for Best Spanish Work of the Year at the Salón del Cómic in Barcelona and the National Comic Prize in 2015, and was nominated for the Eisner Award in 2018 for the Best American Edition of International Material when it was published by Fantagraphics as The Ladies in Waiting. Beowulf, published in the United States by Image, was also nominated for an Eisner Award as Best Adaptation from Another Medium in 2018. His academic essay, La Novela Gráfica, has been translated in Brazil and the United States by the University of Press of Mississippi, and it earned him the prize for Best Writing on Comics at the Salón del Cómic in Barcelona in 2011. And this morning we got a chance to talk to him, and he talked last night about how some of his comics have been adapted for streaming services. El Vecino has been adapted as a television series for Netflix, and García has been adapted for HBO Max. For this session, we will be talking with Jamila and Santiago about their work, which could include Moonrise Over New Jessup, Beowulf, and Ladies in Waiting, all of which can be purchased in the lobby on your way out. First, I would like to ask Jamila to read a short passage from her work, and then I'm going to ask a few questions, and then open it up because I know you have a lot of questions in here that you want to get a chance to talk to them about. So, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. And I want to say thank you again to Francis Marion and everybody, and particularly the students, for showing up. I see a lot of faces that were here yesterday, and it's good to see you all again. So this morning, if you all are reading along, I don't know if you are, but I'm going to start with chapter 5. It starts on page 39. My daddy was a nice-looking man, not even 40 years old, with a strong back and a good head on his shoulders when my mama passed away. Naturally, women visited to console him, bringing food and patting me and Rosie on the head. But with 2 teenage daughters, a quiet way about him, and a deep-well grief, they trickled off after a while. All except Mrs. Odell, a Mrs., I came to learn, only the way women of a certain age marry the Lord. After Mama passed, Mrs. Odell started sending treats home with us from the store at the end of the school day, talking like her and Mama had been the best of friends. I just saw Safi the other day, bless her heart. We were talking about your daddy's love for our sour pickles. You know, I make those myself at the store. As her cold shoulder warmed up to me and Rosie, she even started riding out to the house to offer Daddy rides in her car. But after he declined one too many times and sent her away, that mean marble glint returned to her eye. After she left the last time, Daddy took to work in a long stick of white oak to make strips for a new laundry basket. The piece was a couple inches shorter than him, so around 6 feet tall, and with the width of his 2 thumbs. He shaved splinters with his pocket knife from end to end before notching the top, splitting off a strip, and starting to shave again. As he split, and shaved, stooping, rising over and again, I asked about his intentions with Mrs. Odell. The shh sound of his work slowed briefly, but he continued, not looking up when he said that was a big question for a little girl. I was 13. Well, she is our school teacher, Daddy, Rosie said, so if you put her off, she gonna take it out on us. Y'all two need to worry about y'all's schoolwork and y'all's duties at home. That's it. Not about that Odell woman coming around. But me and Rosie stood to lose whether he made her our stepmama or he didn't. She had been our misery for years, and married to the Lord or not, she would either become a permanent fixture or a woman scorned. Newly 13 and almost 15 was no license to question Daddy about his affairs or to defy him. Still, me and Rosie announced that we were boycotting school till he not only put Mrs. Odell off, but he told her not to punish us for it. My daddy was good-natured till he wasn't. But instead of whooping us, he stayed steadily working that white oak, talking without raising his voice. Y'all ain't going to school because you worried about your teacher picking with you? I hear you right. We both nodded, shifting side to side on our feet. Well, don't that just beat all? While we at it, my darling daughters, let me tell you what else y'all ain't finna do. The shh continued, though one sideways glance from him uncrossed Rosie's arms and sent them shooting, pinned straight to her sides. Y'all think you grown enough to tell me how to handle my business? You think you need to tell me not to go around with Laverne Odell? Daddy, I started. What y'all ain't finna do is just because your mama's gone, you think that I need one woman, let alone two young girls, to boss me. You going to school, know why? The question was obviously a trick because he meant to answer it himself. Rosie muttered, to learn, and I said, to put something in our heads, our dejected words tumbling over each other like struck bowling pins. My daddy didn't even look up from his work, because what you ain't finna do is get hauled off for truancy, only to be sold to some snaggle-toothed, yellow-eyed cracker to die in a mine, not my daughters. Ain't no redneck jailer finna put my daughters on the block for being absent from school. Like all Negro parents, we knew Mama and Daddy never explained themselves to their children. Daddy working coal in his youth was old news, but judging by the slack-mouthed astonishment on Rosie's face, this was also her first time hearing that my daddy had been sold into the mines for truancy. Your schoolhouse is open from August till May, ain't that right? He said. Yes, sir. We were nearly breathless. And the classmates you started with, Bosie Jackson, the rest of his little brothers, Darby Thomas, Mo Marie Saint, they all in the fields now working to help their families, ain't they? How many kids around here you know whose main job it is to go to school? Bring practically nothing home but good marks from August till May, not many. So what y'all ain't finna do is say another peep about boycotting nothing, hard as me and your mama worked. Say what you want about Laverne Odell, but her and her daddy keep that schoolhouse open come hell or high water without a dime of support from the county. So if school's in session 365 days of the year, that's where you'll be. Believe it. Rosie found her voice and started to speak. But Daddy, we just meant, I know what you meant. Now let me tell you what I mean. Y'all two think Mrs. Odell picking with you is the end of days. Well, you ain't never gonna know what it is to have that truant officer haul you away from this house, not as long as I have breath in my body. You didn't know they still sold Negroes, did you? Easy as pie, too. He snapped his fingers. Catch us up for truancy, vagrancy, loitering, false pretenses, fill the jailhouse, and sell everybody off. You ain't gonna know anything about gas sneaking its way up from the bowels of the earth to steal your breath without sight, sound, or smell. Black damp. Not my girls. My girls gonna trust the air they breathe and not spend the rest of their days wondering if that crushing in their chest is a trick of the mind or not. No. What y'all two are gonna know is college. That's what me and your mama promised each other long before we promised you. So if Mrs. Odell want to give y'all good marks and pick with you, you'll fill your heads and forget the rest. You finna quit all this talk about boycotting school, huh? Daddy, we just tired of Mrs. Odell being sometimey, I said. She never had a kind word for Mama, hardly put up with us to be coming around now bringing treats. He looked up briefly from his work and said, this is the last word I'm going to speak on this, so listen good. Her coming around here ain't no treat to me neither. And I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask both of you some questions about themes and things with your writing. My first one, I try to give it sort of a title, Secrets, Confessions, and Half-Truths. So Jamila, about halfway through the novel, I noticed a theme about secrets and confessions, specifically with Alice. So for example, on page 160, she says that she can only tell everything to Rosie in letter form. I think that's what I was getting from that. And then I noticed how Alice eventually talks about a relationship with the truth by saying she has to tell, quote, some truths, half-truths, and non-truths. That's on page 217 and a couple of other times. So Santiago, you've done a lot of different books, but I'm thinking specifically about Ladies in Waiting. Sometimes we get two versions of the truth in regards to Velasquez's character and virtue. Could both of you talk about how secrets and half-truths factor into your stories?
That's a really good question, I think, because if you think about the overall theme of the book, which is to protect this way of life, and all of these different people have these sort of different threads of how they see that as being possible. You know, Raymond has kept secrets from Alice that some come to light, some don't. Alice has kept secrets from Raymond that some about her past, some that come to light and some don't. And I think there's a preservation of sort of self and not raising your trauma. I mean, just in this passage I just read, the first time they hear about their daddy's past, and probably only time he'd ever talked about it in his life, was in response to this sort of childish boycott of school. So I think that there is a amount of self-protection that secrets offer, but then in the larger context of what's going on in New Jessup, I think because everybody has their own vision of New Jessup and they're trying to move the needle forward in a particular way, you know, that is not only self-protection, but she takes on the role of being the protector of a secret that could be, you know, relatively explosive to New Jessup itself. And so, you know, I think particularly in our community, there's a lot of talking we do that words cannot accomplish. There are words, like I'll look at like a sister walking up the street and we share a glance. You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot said in that glance. And so I think that the keeping, the holding, is really a language all of its own.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you to everyone for coming to see us again. In Ladies in Waiting and Las Meninas, there are a lot of conflicting narratives, like different versions of the same story. Obviously, there's a reason for that is very practical, because the setting is in historical, but it's not a historical novel. It's a fiction. It's not a documentary work. And there are a lot of things that we actually don't know about that time, those characters, what happened really, so we have to fill up the gaps or just choose what we prefer for our narrative purposes in the story. But it's also that what I believe is that history is only the stories that we tell. It's not like this real thing that we can just like dig in and find, and it's like, oh, this is what happened really. We only have the stories that we tell about that. I'm not telling that things didn't happen. What I'm trying to tell is that history is what we say that happened with those things. It's a story, a tale that we weave with all those elements and we choose which ones are going to be part of that history, and we choose the perspective which we're going to look at them. So in a way, you could say this is very cynical, because I'm telling that everything is relativistic and everything is a lie, but you can turn it around and you can say that everything is true. Or not, but it's true if you're going with something truthful based on that. So something that I hear a lot lately is like, you're trying to rewrite the history.
Oh.
And it's like an accusation. Like, you're trying to say that the history we've known forever is not what we were saying. You're trying to rewrite it according to your own interests. And it's very political in a way. So what I say is like, yes, I'm trying to rewrite it because someone wrote it first, And I don't like the history they wrote. I prefer the one I'm writing now,
Ah.
which is more truthful to what I've seen or what I think about those things. So I think that's something that we need to do always. And then adding to that about secrets, I have to say that secrets has always been a very important topic for me because, frankly, I grew up reading superhero comics,
Uh-huh.
and the secret identity is, like, for me, the crux of the genre. And that means, I mean, it has a very specific meaning in the lore of the superheroes, but if you look at the word secret identity, means that we all have an identity inside us that nobody else knows, which is what superhero comics is about. And I think that's very important to relate, to be able to relate to the world, especially when you're a teenager and you feel that nobody knows you, nobody knows who you really are, and you start to think, yeah, it's like this. I'm giving a face to the world, but I know that inside I can be someone different, but it's something that nobody can know, but they will know someday something. So secrets, I think, are important to just be sane.
Wow, okay, it's almost like you're reading my script here because seriously, my second question is about historical fiction and world building. Because technically both, I think, of your books are cataloged, well, I'm going Ladies in Waiting, not Beowulf, are cataloged, well, you just talked about non-truths, so we can talk about the essence of truth that you wanted to get right in your books. So both New Jessup and Ladies in Waiting can be categorized as historical fiction. I'm curious about the effort you both put into the world building of your narratives. So Santiago, you mentioned briefly last night. If you didn't get a chance to see him last night, it was a great presentation about placement, comics, how it works all put together. But the research that you had to do, there was a whole subcategory on research. But more importantly, with Ladies in Waiting, you mentioned so many different historical events, both in the life of Velázquez, as well as other famous painters and kings. So that got me thinking. And then Jamila, you mentioned several times yesterday that your novel was greatly inspired by and for your ancestors and elders. And I was just telling you beforehand, if you didn't get a chance, I read her hardback version, but the paperback version, at the very end, there are like top 10 questions that people ask. And I was like, oh, one of my questions was what that was put in there was what kind of research did you do? So you can tell this audience a little bit again about that, because I thought it was interesting. You build a world of New Jessup, and you mentioned historical figures like Booker T. Washington. You talk about drugs like clonidine. Can both of you talk about the conscious efforts that you made when you were building your worlds for your readers? Because you're dealing with history, but you're also fictionalizing it.
So it's not easy.
Okay.
One of the things that I rely on is a lot of old family stories, conversations with my elders, conversations that I remember from my ancestors who have now gone on. And I think, one of the things that drives my work is this Yoruba proverb that says that until the lions have their own historians, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And so to your point about, the telling of history is generally told by the victors. And so this is an opportunity to tell a piece of history that I've learned and over the course of time. But, when you get down to the details, there's a hairdressing scene where they're at the hairdresser, and there's a particular pomade that they were using on the women's hair. And so the woman who had been doing my hair for a long time learned from a woman who would have been doing hair in that generation. And so I sort of sat down with her and I said, I read about Dixie Peach, and I've heard about Dixie Peach, and I've heard about all these different hair products that we don't see or hear anymore, right? And so she sat down and she said, well, nobody uses Dixie Peach. I said, we're talking about 1961. And she said, oh, yeah, okay, well, then I would have learned. And so, it's those conversations. There's a lot of research available online. Old newspapers in advertisements in old newspapers, you'd be surprised at how much. There's an advertisement for like a women's like makeup powder, and one of the colors that it came in was aristocratic brown.
Oh.
Back like way in like 1940. And it was
Nice.
like, because compacts only came in certain colors, you knew that most black women, if they were buying this particular brand, were buying aristocratic brown, right? And so there's a lot of like really small detail that ends up creating and building this world. The cars are really important. The scents, and a lot of memories from coming up, like my family's land. I remember picking a peach like seconds before it was about to fall off a tree. And so you rely on that too. You rely on your own perceptions of the world that you're building, because it comes from your childhood. It comes from the memories that you have, the experiences of people, back in my day stories that are full of stuff and little innuendos. If you're really listening, you hear a lot more than what's being said. And so, obviously there's a lot of academic research that goes into figuring things out, but I think it's really important to listen to the voices of the people who came before us, because ultimately New Jessup is their book about their Alabama in the 50s and 60s. And so I think it's important to try to capture that through their stories.
Thank you.
Well, I have to say that I really envy writers like Jamila who are able to do that kind of detail in world building, and I find that my books are very lacking in world building, which I love, but I think you need an eye for detail. You need to go to very specific things that, in a way, I think that the world building in my graphic novels is a feature that is built into the art, to the drawing, because that's one of the big differences between word and image, that when you're looking at, not image just, but a drawn image, like something drawn by hand. Because every time you look at the page, everything that you're seeing is something that someone made up, like it's not real. So you feel that you're immersed into that world. You have to buy all of the world that lines are drawing for you. And I think it's even easier to get immersed into that world if the style tends more to get away from the naturalistic, photographic, realistic style. When you're trying to get too realistic to maybe go more representative, more closer to a photography, you risk to fall into the uncanny valley of something here is almost like reality, but it's not. But when you're working in a more caricature style, you're giving to the reader exactly what he has to believe or what he has to buy to get into the story. And I think, for me, world building is more about that, because I did a lot of research about 17th century and painters of that time and life in palace and kings and queens and everything. But it was most about history, and it was most about theory of the art and things like that. For a second, Javier and I peep at the pit of the details of clothing and shoes and hairstyles and all those things at that time, and we decided, okay, let's go back, because this is a black hole, and we're going to be sucked for all these little details that we don't really need to tell our story, because it's not about that. It's going to work in a very different way than a prose novel. So, yeah, I would like to do more world building, but I leave that to my artists.
Thank you for that. I think James and Madison, we're going to start enlisting your help, if that's okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. So I would like to, we got a little bit of time here, and you came all this way, and I want to give you a chance to get your voice out here. So James and Madison are going to come up. They're going to steal Santiago's microphone, and you two can share that one. And if you have a question that you would like to ask either of our authors, please raise your hand now so we can find you. We've already got some here. So let's just, yeah, go ahead.
Santiago Garcia, in Guerra de los Mundos, one thing I thought was interesting was that you showed humanity invading Mars instead of vice versa, and I wanted to ask why you guys decided to go that route.
Well, the easy answer is that it's a story that's been told many times, and everybody knows, so let's give it a twist and see what happens. That's easy answer, but when you do that, which is something that many times you think about when you, I mean, we are working over previous works. I mean, that's culture, that's writing, that's originality. It's not like I came from another planet or something. It's just like you're working over things that have already been done. So many times your inspiration comes from I read this and what will happen if we flip it over or with something else. But it's not so easy. Once you've done that, you have to see if that means something now. And I thought that that would mean something now because it could be like giving voice to the people who is on the losing side of the war always. Like the original novel is a British novel written at the time that Britain was an empire and they have like colonies all over the world, so they were like the center of the world, of the universe. And the writer, who actually was very progressive, but was thinking like, we are at the top of the game, so what will happen if someone else will come and do that to us? But he was actually put in that position of center, you know? And I was thinking, let's go and give the spotlight to the side, to what will happen on the other side. And I thought that was very productive, but because that led to a completely different story of that the original was one. I mean, it's not really an adaptation. It's like you get the starting point and go and run in a different direction, which is what I like to do with those works.
All right, thank you. We got a question back here.
Mostly I had a question about inspirations regarding, like, you both have ties to historical fiction in your novels. I wanted to know mostly where the inspirations came from for you. What led you to pursue these? There's usually a theme or a moment where you truly feel like it can clicked. What were those moments for you two?
So I have, there are a bunch of things over the years that sort of led to the writing of New Jessup. I will say that the primary inspiration for the work is just the stories that I came up hearing my entire life. And, my family, I think like most every family, y'all have those old photo albums and stuff where you ask, well, who's that and who's that and who's that? And over time, you recognize two things happen. First, people start forgetting the people in the photo albums. And then over time, the people who you're asking about the names of the people in the photo album start to become ancestors. So they transition. And so history is getting lost. They say every time an elder dies, a library burns. And so our history continues to there's a cycle of losing our history. And so New Jessup really started as an opportunity for me to take a lot of my family's anecdotes and fictionalize them, because one thing I will never get permission for my family is to write our actual nonfiction history. But they're thrilled to see like all the Easter eggs that are nods to our family history in this book. And so, I wanted something that we could hold on to and say for years and generations to come, this actually links back to a story from our history, or this person is inspired by this other person in our family. And so I never really intended to even publish New Jessup. I thought it was just going to be something I like sort of self-published and rode around in my trunk around Alabama saying, hey, y'all, I wrote a book about our family. And, things sort of took a different turn, and I'm very grateful for that, because not only do I get a chance now to memorialize these people, particularly people like Alice, who are the first ones to be forgotten in those photos, but all the people, and then we get to share that with ourselves, and I get to share the greatness and the complexity of my family with the world, and have really necessary conversations, I think, about what a place like this means and what these stories mean to all of us.
Inspiration is easy. I mean, I have so many inspirations along the day. It's like anything is an inspiration. Like anything that you read, you're watching a movie, you're reading the news, you're talking to people, you're taking a walk, and suddenly it's like, oh, this could be a story. There's something here. Or at least a seed of a story, like an idea. And you go to your notebook and you write it down and leave it there and see what's happened, or if that develops or anything like that. But the thing is that this is something we were talking yesterday, that what you end up doing, at least in my case, is not just that brilliant idea that you have, but something that has remained with you for a long time. Because that's the proof that you really care about that, and you have had time to really mature that idea, maybe even go through different times in your life in which you change your way of thinking about that same subject, and finally get to a point where you feel that this is something that you have to say. There are many things that you could say, but which ones are the ones that you have to say? And that's the point in which you really work. So, for example, I haven't been obsessed with Las Meninas all my life, not at all. I didn't even care about the painting. I mean, for me, I thought that it was really boring. What I was obsessed with was the theory of art, and what do we deem is a masterpiece, what are these ideas we have about what matters or not in art, where does that come from? I have been thinking about those things a long time. I have been studying that, and then Las Meninas came as a study case for that thing, and was something that obviously I have had in my life forever, because in Spain, you know Las Meninas since you were a kid. So I used that. Bio was something that I have in my life for, 20 years or more, 30 years maybe, before we finally made a comic of that. And that's the case with almost, there's nothing that I published that wouldn't go back at least for years in my life till I got that. So I have an archive of, I don't know how many ideas, inspirations, and it keeps growing and growing, and I think I do like less than 1% in my life, if that.
All right, other questions? Raise your hand. Oh, we got someone in the back there.
Miss Minnicks, Rosie is such an important character in your book. She is the plot, basically. I just want to know your decision of never bringing her fully on page except for through flashbacks and through like a hallucination. What is your decision on that? And is she based off of anyone you know?
That's actually the second question I'll answer first, because when I published New Jessup, before it actually went to print, I gave it to everybody in my family. I said, listen, y'all, this book is going to actually be a book that we send around, so I want y'all's blessing. And so my cousin asked me, she was like, how did you know about my uncle, her daddy's uncle, her daddy's brother? And I said, what about him? And she said, the same thing that happened to him happened basically with Rosie and with what happened with their father when he was a child. They never heard from him again. So, I mean, like I always say in the audience, I could have cousins that I just don't know about because the family was separated. And so with Rosie, you know, we sort of touched on this yesterday about this idea of the Great Migration and how Black people left the South. And you have to think about, you know, we talk about silencing our phones and not having, you know, I remember I was giving a talk at FAMU, and there was like the day of the AT&T outage. How many folks in here have AT&T? Anybody? Nobody in here has AT&T?
Yeah, there they are.
So, right. And so and a lot of the students at FAMU had AT&T. And so when we talked about it there, I said, now think about how devastating it feels to you right now. I know that's not an AT&T person. I said, think about how y'all don't have access to like your crush or somebody, you know, right now that you can't get in contact with just for these, you know, these hours that AT&T is down. And so you can't get that text message from that crush and you have like 3 dots hanging out, right? Whatever. How devastating that is, that break in transmission. Now, go back with me in time to 1957, where there are not only no cell phones, but a lot of folks in rural areas didn't even have telephones in their house. So in order to have a telephone conversation, you had to go to a store, you had to find a way to get somewhere that had a telephone. So the main mode of transmission of messages was letters. So if somebody gets jammed up, somebody gets lost, you know, somebody moves unexpectedly, what happens to that communication? It breaks. And so many people back in the day, because of that break, because of that Great Migration, so many people had breaks like that. And so, you know, they weren't always like this. You know, Alice and Rosie were separated by the end of the book for about 9 years. And I'll tell you another thing. My daddy was a young man, went into the Army, went into college, and then served his time in the Army, and then went off the map for 8 years. And it was a time when you could do something like that. And so this is 8 Christmases, 8 New Year's, 8 birthdays, all this stuff, right? And by the time he shows up back at his home house in Virginia, he's got a muscle car, my mama on his arm, and they're engaged, and a job at IBM. And they're like, where you been for 8 years? And to the end, to this day, my daddy passed a few years ago, nobody knows. So, I mean, I think it's important to recognize, and that was to your point about the decision, it would have felt like a slap in the face of all those lost connections to tie it up in a nice, neat bow, to say, oh, all of a sudden the sisters found each other. It's not to say that they never will, but in those years, I think it's important for the reader to experience just a fraction of the anxiety and the angst that Alice is feeling, because she doesn't know where her sister is. And then the manipulation on behalf of patients to push that needle. I think it's really important for people to understand. Y'all have brothers, sisters, cousins who you love dearly. Think about never being able to see them again. Just like they walk out of your life one day and you never see them again. Some of them you might welcome. But I'm just saying, a lot of times if you love somebody, you want to keep that connection, keep them close. So that's a good question.
Yeah. Other questions? Raise your hand. Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, Chris.
Thank you. I love the novel, Ladies in Waiting. I thought it was great. Infidelity seems to be a common theme throughout this novel.
Oh.
And it wasn't until I finished the book that I maybe got the full picture of it. Were all the women that Diego Velasquez was with throughout this novel the ladies in waiting?
Sorry?
Were all the women that Diego Velasquez was with throughout this novel the ladies in waiting?
What are the women?
Were they the ladies in waiting?
Who were?
Diego was with throughout the novel. It just, it seems to be a common theme.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't thought of that. Really, that's a good point, and I'm going
And,
to think that now the translation of the title that I really hated is instead a clever twist on the plot of the. I will say, well, congratulations, you were so clever to give this double meaning to the title. Because, yeah, there's a lady in waiting, and it's Velasquez's wife. Ladies in waiting
Yeah.
las meninas.
Okay. It was a good.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, but thank you for
Okay.
giving me
You did it,
this
Chris. You
insight
did it.
into it. I didn't
Okay.
get that question because it was like, okay, what's he talking about? But yeah, it's true. Yeah, the Las Meninas are what they translated as the ladies in waiting, and are the ladies that form like the court of the princess.
Okay.
You know, so the ones that appear in the painting, and the title, the name actually was given like 2 centuries after, 3 centuries after the fact. No, the original name was always like the family of the king or something, and then this is part of what we were talking about, the history and the stories. Like you feel you get to learn what they told you about the painting, the importance and everything, and you think that it's been like that forever, and then you start to dig in, and you suddenly find out that everything started sometime in the 19th century, 300 years afterwards, when someone decided that this was convenient to their own ends, and we've just been following on that since then. So that's the real meaning of the ladies in waiting, but it's true that he lives and he has his lady in waiting back home while he's with another woman in Italy, and yeah, I can only say thank you. This has been very rewarding.
All right. Good one, Chris. Good job. We have time for one more audience question. You came all this way to see these authors. Yes. All right. Last quick question.
Okay, I have 2. I'll go with Beowulf. So in Beowulf, there's one scene after the mother and Grendel die. And we were talking about it in class, and it kind of looked like there were like these cells like swimming away from the dead bodies. And so I wanted to ask if like the third monster in the book, if it had any relation, I guess, to the first 2 monsters, if it like maybe kind of arose from them in a way, if that makes sense.
Well, I didn't write the plot, so. But yeah, that's a good question. That's one of the things that really attracted me from the Beowulf, is that there's no relation, and actually, I mean, it's a tale so old that it feels like so different from the way we tell stories now. It's not even a story. It's more like, I don't know, some kind of I don't know, funeral chant or something, in which you're actually like seeing the whole life of the hero in just one instance. So, but we tell it sequentially because that's the way we tell stories. And the third monster, I mean, this kind of old poems that are anonymous and everything, they could be anything. It could be stitched from different sources. It could be not part of the original story. You feel that it has no relation with the 2 first parts because it happens like 50 years later in a different place. It's a different monsters and everything. They did this movie like years ago with directed by Robert Zemeckis, which was they tried to do like the postmodern version of the Beowulf, in which you go behind the story and then you stitch everything together and everything has meaning, like we usually do now. And then the third monster was like the son that Beowulf had with Grendel's mother, because everything was different of how the original poem told. I mean, it sounds terrible, but I think it was actually clever and it was well done. But that wasn't what we were aiming for. We wanted to do something that had like that kind of tone, so epic and so old, especially so old and so strange, like something that comes from other world because it actually comes from another world. I mean, we don't really understand what they're talking about of the kind of relationships of war in which they move. So we went with being as straight with the story and so close to the original source as we could, except for one thing. Well, actually not the original story, but more the retelling of the story that I read in the children's book when I was a kid, because there are things that are different from the other. But so for one thing that I changed is very subtle in some of the pages, in the way this story is told, which if you read it that way, that changes completely the meaning of the story. And that the story will be completely upside down, but you have to read behind the lines. You have to understand that. And this was so cleverly done that nobody yet has been able to find out the secret story. Yeah, it is. I've given hints to very intelligent people who have been closer to that, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to remind you that these books are for sale in the lobby. Please go and see them after the session. I know these days are meant to inspire you as readers and potential writers. So I would like for you to think about how you would write your own stories. They've been talking about that already today and yesterday. I'd like for you to stick around for the next session. It starts at 10:30. It's called Draft and Craft with the Writing Center and the Snow Island Review, where you will get a chance to work on your own creative work in a judgment-free environment. So please stick around at 10:30 for that. If you would like to talk to Jamila or Santiago after this session, let's go out into the lobby so that people can prepare for the next session. And before we go, let's give them another round of applause. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So. See, this is what I'm talking about. I can't read one sheet. I thought she was going to read the letter.